Hello, my name is Randi Reppen. I teach at Northern Arizona University, and today I'll be talking to you about developing successful writers through task-based writing. I'll begin with a general overview of the presentation. First, we'll look at some typical academic writing tasks. Then we'll look at the fact that different tasks use different organization, getting started. Then we'll see how different tasks use different language resources, making progress. And then we'll look at different tasks using different editing approaches, finishing up, and then we will wrap up the presentation. Let's begin with a look at typical academic writing tasks. Academic writing, regardless of the task, is going to have an informational focus. But that informational focus can be organized in several different ways. And here are some of the typical tasks in which academic writing organizes information. So we have arguments, taking a position, not just arguing with someone. We have compare and contrast, report, opinion. We even have narratives in here, but narratives that have an informational focus. And these are most typically found in disciplines like history or in sometimes in geography, or certainly in English we find it. So different tasks use different organizational strategies. Getting started. So if we're going to write information in response to a writing task, we need to have some information, right? We've got to find some information, and often our students are going to get information online. So it's really good to start with the idea of looking at what sources are reliable, what sources are unreliable, and what sources might be reliable or might not be reliable. They need more research. So a good way to do this is to help students become aware of the suffixes of the websites. So suffixes like .edu, .gov, or .org can, if they're professional journals, can be very useful. Sites that are blogs, and most of these sites will be ending in com, or company sites, may not be reliable. They might be pushing a certain point of view. Sources that need more research could include newspapers, nonprofit sites, and of course, the famous Wikipedia. So after we tell our students this, it's useful to do a little activity where maybe you have them match different sites and also introduce them to questions that they should consider when they're evaluating an internet source. Who wrote it? When was it published? And who is it for? And again, in who wrote it, sometimes that's not always easy to find out. So we have to encourage our students to be good detectives, good informational detectives. So now we have some information, and let's say that we're going to be writing an argument. We're going to be taking a position. So this T-chart is very useful for putting information, notes and information that support your position and information that does not support your position. And you might be thinking, why would I want information that doesn't support my position? It's because any good argumentative paper is going to anticipate arguments against the position that you're taking. And so you want to have that information and be able to incorporate it in your essay. It's also good to use this sort of a chart, table chart, to put sources down and information that supports your point of view, some notes on that, and sources that oppose your point of view, and also include some notes on that. Now, we've looked at making an argument, but what happens when we're doing something that is a compare and contrast task? That's different from an argument, so let's look at how we might want to organize that information. And in this case, a Venn diagram is particularly useful. You can put information on one side that is related to one of the topics. Put this on the other side. So maybe you're debating about living in the city or living outside the city. So you would maybe on this side put in comparing what it means to live in the city, contrasting that with what it means to live outside the city. And in this part, you would put aspects that are shared, whether you're living inside or outside the city. And in general, for any of these tasks, it's really good to have some ideas about the hook that you want to use, and also to write notes about background information, and maybe even jot down some notes for a thesis statement or several thesis statements, depending on the type of writing and depending on the proficiency of the student. So now we have some information, and now we realize that different tasks use different organizational strategies for each task. But now we have some information. How are we going to make progress writing? What's some of the language that we're going to use, and how do some of these tasks use differently? So if we want to support a position, we have the use of experts, we have the use of facts and statistics. We also have the use of the point here, point A, which is logical connection. So being able to make an if-then statement where we can show a logical connection. So that's one type of language that we would need to be able to use in supporting a position. And of course, the other two, opinion of experts and facts and statistics, we need to be able to present that information. So let's look at some of the language we can use. In any informational task, whether it's a description, a compare-contrast, a report, summary response, students are going to have to use reporting verbs. And I think all of us have struggled with the fact that many times students just have a few favorite reporting verbs and they say or show or state. Those are the three that tend to come out a lot for students. So let's give them some other reporting verbs that they might find useful. So here's a nice little list in order of frequency of verbs that take that clauses that are reporting verbs. So a recent government report suggests that obesity is a problem, blah, 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 or declares or explains. So this is an important structure for our students to have for reporting information. Now, another thing that we want to be able to do when we're dealing with informational texts is we want to be able to highlight certain aspects about information, and we also want to be able to question. And the structure of it plus a verb is a very productive structure for doing this. And so we know from research that it's really common to use this extraposed it structure. And so we'll see things like, it is important. And we see this with novice writers, whether they're first language English writers or second language English writers, there's a really heavy reliance on it is important. And so it's nice to give our students some more resources for that. And we can see here, we have, it is clear that, it is better to, it is likely that. So we can also downtone a little bit so that we're not making such an assertive statement, which is also another characteristic of novice writers. They tend to be too emphatic. And we can also use this same strategy of it to question or downtone. So we can say, it is unlikely that blah, blah, blah. And so we also have it seems, and that's a nice hedge to make an assertion, but not make it too strong. So we can have it seems that, it seems likely, it seems unlikely. So these are all really useful language bits, little tidbits for our students to have in their repertoire for highlighting or questioning. We also want to give students practice, so we could give them some sentences, like people need to find more time to prepare a healthy dinner every night. And then we want them to turn that into using the structure we just practiced or talked about. So we would see that they could write, it is important for people to find time to prepare a healthy dinner. We can also talk about language for relationships. And this isn't like a mother-daughter or boyfriend-girlfriend. This is to talk about cause and effect. And we know that when we talk about relationships, cause-effect relationships, the three nouns that are very, very common are cause, reason, and factor. And again, we want to give our students some language support. So here we have adjectives that we know frequently occur. This is all based on corpus research. Whenever you see this data from the real world, it's based on corpus research. And so we can see that with cause, we get leading cause, likely cause, important cause. Adjectives that are frequently occurring with reason are good reason, main reason. Adjectives that are frequently occurring with factor can be another factor, major factor, key factor. So again, just language for our students. And then finally, we want to look at different tasks that use different editing approaches. So I'm calling this part finishing up. So we've started out by getting started and looking at how we can organize information, how we get and organize information. Then we looked at the language, the vocabulary, and some sort of lexicogrammar, so grammar and vocabulary working together to accomplish different writing purposes. And now we're going to look at finishing up and using different editing approaches. So in here, I want to talk about some steps that can be really useful for going from editing from feedback from a peer to editing by yourself. In this case, we have some questions. The student's given a draft to the peer. The peer has read it. You're also reading theirs. And so when you are evaluating what the feedback from the peer is, you might be asking yourself which of the ideas seem strongest, which need to be explained more clearly. And so as you use this feedback, you're going to revise, and maybe you don't have the opportunity to get a second round of peer feedback and you have to do this by yourself. So it can be very useful to use a checklist. Did you answer the prompt completely? Did you write an effective thesis statement? And of course, depending on the student's level, whether they're high beginner, intermediate, high intermediate, or advanced, these checklists can be adapted. And then finally, a checklist for reviewing and editing the grammar in the report. So going through the paper not only for content, but also for grammatical features. So this is a very stepwise checklist approach. And sometimes we don't have the benefit of having peer editing session. So I think it's also useful to think about a general editing checklist. And here's an example of one that I found particularly useful that addresses all aspects related to a writing task. So it addresses the audience. Is it clear who my audience is? Is there anything I can do to make my writing clearer? The purpose of the task, the length, have you stayed in the requirement, minimum, maximum length of the task? The organization of the information, also the different strategies that you would be using, maybe a hook, making sure you have clear thesis statements, then checking grammar, looking at the vocabulary, and then the sources if you've used sources. And then you might leave some questions for yourself to think about, and you could even give this to another student for peer revising, for peer review rather, for them to see if they agree with whether your yeses and nos line up. So I hope in this brief presentation, you've seen that basically we have moved through the writing process. We brainstormed, we made notes, we used language to accomplish different tasks, and then we talked about revising and editing as we move towards a final version. We also explored the language demands of different types of writing tasks, from brainstorming all the way through editing.